Hello again, and welcome to another episode of BitNote. I've got a great Saints Row themed episode lined up for you now, so sit back and have a listen to some great video game tunes and talk about one of the quirky and fun video game series that's out there. Have a listen and hope you enjoy. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the show. Saints Row is one of those video game series that's actually almost more fun to just step back and talk about the whole series as the games themselves. A lot of times games will go through a lot of versions and a little formula, but generally they'll stick to the same theme and try to reiterate a couple of times. But Saints Row has had like 4 games, and in each one they've constantly taken a step in a new direction and ended up very, very far from where it was. The most recent game, Saints Row 4, even actually looked back on the previous games as a result. But what actually makes these games sort of fun? Well, to start with, I'm just going to play the theme tune of Saints Row the Third, i.e. Saints Row 3, as I'm probably going to end up calling it for this episode, because getting fancy with the actual naming conventions just gets tiring at times and you just go for the basics. So I'll play a bit of Saints Row the Third's main theme and talk a bit more about the series afterwards. Have a listen. And that was the main theme for Saints Row the Third. It was composed by Malcolm Kirby Jr. and of course was from Saints Row the Third, which was developed by Volition. So the Saints Row started off with the original Saints Row in 2006, which was a game that some people describe as a sandbox, and other people, especially then, just described as a Grand Theft Auto knockoff. Grand Theft Auto, it all starts basically in 2001 with Grand Theft Auto 3. They developed a new type of game. You see, What Grand Theft Auto did was end up providing a new sort of game experience. It was with Grand Theft Auto 3 that they took it 3D and it became very popular. But the idea was that you were set in a 3D world, a location, normally a city, and you could walk around. And instead of like having one level after another, you'd walk around this great big city, and then you'd go to the mission starts and it would take you through a mission, and the mission would take place in the city, and then it would finish up. Now, the whole approach was basically, of course, Grand Theft Auto 3 was also marked for its violence, but what also marked it, especially for me, is the fact that you start the game, and after a bit of missions, you end up having an entire city to explore. And you can just wander around and do anything. You can carjack random cars, you can punch pedestrians in the face, which is probably not that good a thing to do. But the real thought about this game is that it actually just provided a sort of an idea of just having this area to explore and have fun and take on your own terms, and then when you wanted to, take on a mission and do some fun stuff. So Grand Theft Auto had several sequels, each doing different variations. One of it took place in a knockoff of New York City, and another took place in kind of like a Miami-like location, and then there was a whole thing that took place in areas like, I mentioned San Andreas before, which took place in like Los Angeles and San Francisco and Las Vegas, or at least, kind of knockoffs of that. And around about 2005-2006, the new generation of consoles, the Xbox 360 had been, and PlayStation 3 had been released, and so the new Grand Theft Auto was gearing up for their big one, Grand Theft Auto 4, which would take place in a city. Saints Row, the first Saints Row was released before then, and was kind of like their attempt at saying, wait, we made a Grand Theft Auto-like game on this platform before Grand Theft Auto did, and that was all very fun. And so it was released, and I never played the first Saints Row game, so it kind of like handicaps my entire ability to discuss this. But from what I know, it was a Grand Theft Auto game in the sense that, yes, you were in a city, you joined this street gang, you fought against all these other gangs, you try to establish dominance, you try to clean up the city, so you're kind of like a sort of a villain protagonist. And essentially, like what people love about these kind of games, what I love about these games, is that, you get to walk around the city and you run around and you hijack cars and you go to drive to different places and explore, and you find collectibles and you find activities. And one thing that Saints Row had going for it is that you didn't just do a mission in one part of the city and then go to another part, but you could also, by driving around, you could find these activities in the city and engage in them and have lots of fun. So that was the first game, and then the second game was released, and this is where things get kind of interesting and kind of fun. You see, the first game, it was pretty, gritty. It was, it was the standard thing of, street gangs and shootings and, neighborhoods and, respect and all this sort of stuff. And Saints Row 2 did take that, You basically woke up after a coma. There were 3 gangs that you had to fight up against. And essentially, you had to try to defeat the gangs, take control of the city again. But it was kind of fun, and that's where it took. I mean, trust me, some of the stuff in Saints Row 2 got very, very brutal. You were shooting and blasting, and a lot of stuff was happening. But at the same time, it was there was a lot of fun. One of the gangs you were up against were basically these people who were called the Ronin, and they dressed in all these bright yellow jackets, and then went around with samurai swords and had this whole oriental theme, and it was kind of cool. It was fun. And some of the activities, such as the classic one where you drive around in a truck and shoot sewage at houses, I mean, that was just a blast. And then Saints Row 3 came out, and boy, I'm just going to play another track from that game before I really describe this. Hang on. and that was Endgame, also from Saints Row the Third by Malcolm Kirby Jr. Well, Malcolm Kirby Jr. did the music, and Volition did the actual game itself, so there we go. So with Saints Row the Third, they were in a kind of a feared position. With the first game, they'd been gritty. I mean, throughout the entire Saints Row thing, they kept their keystones intact. They had a city to explore. It was fun. You had a lot of activities. In each game, you were with a group of a street gang called the Saints, and you were just trying to gain control, defeat a bunch of gangs, which were often kind of like comically themed, almost like the Warriors, for instance. And you were making your way through the game just to get going a lot of fun activities and trying to get through. But the first game had kind of been gritty, realistic, almost kind of like talking about gang warfare in real urban areas, almost like the social examination of, of American cities. The second game, like I said, got a little crazier and a bit more funnier, but here's the thing though, the crazier and funny things is what people tended to actually like about it. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people who liked the first two games because they kind of were serious, and the second game, like I said, it kind of went back and forth. There were some really nasty bits in the second game, but at least it was kind of like, but they had a lot of crazy and hilarious bits as well, and it was just fun. Like, right from the beginning, you're escaping from prison, and pretty soon you end up on a boat with a gun turret sort of thing on it, so you're having a bit of fun there. But people liked a lot of the fun aspects, and so Volition were left with the decision with the Saints Row 3. Do they continue being serious, which incidentally was what Grand Theft Auto was doing with Grand Theft Auto 4, and Grand Theft Auto 4 got a really negative reception because it was a little too serious, and that they even marketed Saints Row 3 as being more crazy and kooky and fun, and that had actually paid off for them. Or so do they want to like keep the kooky thing going, or do they want to keep like sort of serious, kind of like a strong tone? And the result was Saints Row 3 where, damn, they were decided to go completely crazy. They made it so that the street gang was now basically a bunch of international celebrities who were making a huge amount of paid endorsements. They some of the missions were still kind of brutal and severe, but there were stuff like freaking VTOL jets, all these like flying hover bike sort of things going around. And this, one of my favorites is this game called Professor Genki's Super Ethical Reality Climax, which took a bit of inspiration from a Bizarre Creations game called The Club, where basically it's like a Japanese game show where you get into an arena and have to make your way through the arena, killing as many of these basically costumed attackers as you can, who are all dressed up in like dog outfits or dressed in mascot forms, and it's all kind of crazy and kind of fun. But I just love it because each time you shoot the enemy, you have to shoot the next one really soon afterwards in order to keep this combo thing going, and it's just fast and frantic as the gameplay pulls you through. But Saints Row 3 did a lot of this crazy stuff, and it was fun, but it also there were some things I just weren't keen on about Saints Row 3. It was a good game, but it's just, for one thing, I hated the city it took place in. The first two took place in Stillwater with a bit of a revamp before then, but the next one took place in another city, which they ended up in, and I just never liked the design. It just was repetitive. I spent so much time, but I always found it hard to instantly recognize which part of the city I was in, because it was like a lot of it felt very samey, and a lot of it tended to take place at night, which made it harder to make out. And I'm really, really sorry. I know the developers worked hard on that city. I know making a city, an entire gameplay environment that'll work multiple times, is one of the most powerful things you can do. But I just didn't like the city that much. I just found it, repetitive, and I couldn't get a good sense of location, and it lacked interesting and characteristics or sweeping vistas or anything. But that's the way you go, okay? So, so they took place in a not the best city, and but they did get a little crazy. I mean, they had a lot of fun weapons. Like I said, they had, in one stage you take down an aircraft carrier, and another time you take place down an aircraft carrier that's also actually an aircraft. You're doing a lot of crazy. You're going up against military. You're going up against some Mexican wrestlers, and there's also a genetics lab which goes pretty crazy at the same time. And I mean, it was a good game, but I always just felt that sometimes a lot of its crazy stuff was kooky. For instance, at one point in the game they throw in zombies, and then that's kind of it, and then they're restricted to an island, and it's kind of good that they're zombies, but it's almost like, they want to do this crazy thing, so they put it in, but they didn't work it in with everything else. And that's a lot of the game. Saints Row 3, I like it. But then Saints Row 4 came out, and let's just say it took everything to a crazy and insane new level. So like I said, you had Saints Row, which was the original sort of like gangster kind of generic Grand Theft Auto sort of game. You had Saints Row 2, which was taking those things but going at a crazy level. And then Saints Row 3, which was going like really kind of crazy, a lot of fun, a lot of different things, but somehow it just didn't quite hit the right notes and hit the right footing for itself. But it did involve some cool stuff, but still not quite comfortable. But then Saints Row 4. And why don't I throw you the theme from this game? It's from also the same composer, Malcolm Kirby Jr. Have a listen. And that was Saints Row 4 main theme. It was composed by Malcolm Kirby Jr. from Saints Row 4 by Volition. So, essentially, what did Saints Row 4 do? Honestly, overall, it just seemed to just take everything that had been gone before it and really finally find its own pace. Everything seemed consistent. It seemed to know what it was doing. And more importantly, it was utterly fun and crazy and freaking brilliant. The whole thing, pretty much. Essentially what happens is you are now the President of the United States. You did this after foiling a terrorist plot in a thing that kind of takes the piss out of Call of Duty, because Saints Row 4 does a lot of parodying other games, which is fine, but I think it's still fun on its own. And essentially you're under the President, then aliens attack, destroy the Earth, and you're trapped in a computer simulation. This is where things get a bit crazy. You see, the simulation is conveniently the exact same city that you played for in Saints Row 3, and hence, when I was getting Saints Row 4, this was my major reservation. It's like, do I have to visit that damn city again? I mean, I don't like that city. It's not a particularly good city. It's kind of an annoying city. But I figured, well, there's a lot of really cool stuff in Saints Row 4, so maybe it'll help gloss over the fact it's a bad city. And indeed, they did. You see, the stuff you get in Saints Row 4 is that you get superpowers, i.e. you get a bunch of really cool powers that let you run really, really fast, jump really, really high, and then a bunch of other things as the game progresses that causes a huge amount of chaos and distraction for everyone around you, such as including ability to freeze enemies, or mind control enemies, or pick them up and throw enemies, or so on. And boy, it is good. Saints Row 4 started as a April Fool's joke, and then they were going to make a kind of like a whole, additional downloadable content, but then it kind of developed into the full game. And the fact it's in a virtual reality means that they can just throw in a lot of cool stuff, and it just kind of works. The idea is that now that you're in the simulation, you've got two objectives. One is use the simulation to free a lot of your friends who are still trapped in the simulation, and your former crewmates. And secondly, also, it's to destabilize the simulation, which somehow destabilizes the actual computer network of the aliens who are running it, so that you'll be able to hit them hard in real life, because apparently the aliens are really, really bad at creating clearly separated systems and decent security protocol. But then again, since one of the things that this game parodies is Independence Day, in which case an alien craft is hacked by a MacBook, I suppose it's just in-fitting for the theme. So it's like, but the great thing about it is that, like I said, previously you used to be exploring the city. You'd walk around, you might get into a car, you'd change the radio, you'd drive around, maybe you hit a booster, you'd inevitably end up on a pavement and start running over pedestrians, unfortunately. You'd fly around, you'd have a fair bit of fun, and then you'd try to get to your next mission. The thing is, with superpowers, for a start, you don't even need to get into a car. It takes a lot of inspiration from a lot of other games. I noticed traces of like Spider-Man 2, the first Spider-Man 2 video game, not the second Spider-Man 2 video game. That's what happens when movie franchise reboot. But of that Spider-Man, and a bit of Prototype, and a bit of Crackdown. And so the idea is that while you can get into cars and drive around, you can also pick up the car with your telekinetic power and throw it, and then you can also run at high speed all over the place, overtaking anything, and then create gigantic leaps across buildings, Superman style, and then go running up the side of buildings and leap more and jump and then glide around the city in a way that's not flying quite, but close to it. And that's kind of what's fun about the game, because you had all this terrain that used to be restricted to. Like, there's this one island, and there's this huge, like, overpass that's, like, several stories up. And sometimes you're on the motorway, and you're looking down, you want to go down to the island, but if you fall, but the only way to get down is to jump, and then if you're down there, how do you get back up again? Problem solved in Saints Row 4. You just massively jump. It's like taking the terrain of Saints Row 3 and saying, screw it, this is frustrating terrain, let's just screw it up, jump over, run over, use a bunch of superpowers to make funning and running over it as fast as possible, and then that's what you do. You go and you have fun, and you blast and jump and run over everything, and then that's how the game goes. And it's just great from the gameplay, because it's fun. It's almost like power storming everything. And then there's the part where you rescue your friends, and it's even more fun. You see, you end up going into their own personal nightmares. But of course, each one has their own specific nightmare, and this ends up referencing stuff. So you're kind of like, you're not just like playing another level of video game, you're kind of playing a scenario that kind of like expresses how this character is feeling. And that's one of the things about Saints Row 4. It just, all your characters, all the people there are characters. It's a crazy world, it's an insane world, but the game kind of accepts it and makes fun of it at times, and also enjoys it, but it also accepts that the people there are really, human beings, like with characters, sometimes comical characters. But like, for instance, when you go into one of the things, Shondi's, her terrible nightmare involves one of her best friends being killed, so you kind of go back to that moment, and you see her sobbing over the body, and it's dramatic. And then as she sobs over the body, the zombie suddenly comes up like a zombie, and so she suddenly attacks, punches him several times, kills him once again, and then goes back to sobbing over his body almost instantly, which I really liked, because it's kind of a trope in horror that a body will suddenly resurrect, and they were playing that off, but it was also kind of like, we realized that this was mandatory, that this is a crazy world where suddenly he was coming back to life in this nightmare world. But at the same time, the fact that she did what needed to be done didn't mean that she was still sorry about it. So I just love the tonal shift of, sobbing, some crazy frantic action, and then back to sobbing sentimentally again. It was just very fun. But so that's what a lot of Saints Row is about. It's about just the game getting kind of settled, but also having fun. It does a lot of crazy stuff still. It has like a tentacle bat that you hit enemies and they go flying. Oh, it also has a dubstep gun where you basically kill enemies and aliens through the power of dubstep. It shoots out a bunch of beats and then they sort of rhythmically move, so if you like that sort of stuff. I was never that keen on dubstep. I still haven't quite figured it out, but I do agree that there is certain potential in killing enemies with dubstep. And overall, just like I said, Saints Row 4 just felt that whenever they had a good idea, they actually went with it and developed it and took it to its conclusion. And that's something that I think Saints Row 3 didn't quite have. It seemed a lot random, for instance. For instance, a celebrity pops up in Saints Row 3 and nothing much gets done with it. But in Saints Row 4, you get it's much more consistent. For instance, you get, like, I think Keith David is his name, who's like a famous actor and voice actor, and he just shows up playing himself in the game, and that's fun. And then he has a nice little story arc where you have to rescue him from his own nightmare and he does his own actions, which you do it, and that's all really cool. Oh, also another thing I like about the game, all the Saints Row games offer a lot of huge amount of customization. You can male, female, you can choose your clothes and complete body type, everything. And since the second game, you've also been able to choose what your voices are. You usually have 3 male voices and 3 female voices. And then since Saints Row the Third, you actually had an extra novelty voice, which in Saints Row the Third was a zombie voice. But in Saints Row 4, you get your novelty voice is now Nolan North. Nolan North is like this voice actor who's done a lot of stuff and has played the voice for quite a few video game protagonists. So I thought it was pretty hilarious that, Nolan North is so known for playing video game protagonists, such as like Nathan Drake in the Uncharted, I think Deadpool in the Deadpool video game, and of course in Spec Ops: The Line, where he's almost parodying, video game protagonists. But the thing is, I just like the idea that the people at Volition who made Saints Row 4 said, yes, Nolan North plays a lot of video game protagonists, so why don't we just let you have Nolan North voice your character and just call that voice, Nolan North. No explanation needed. And that's exactly what you can do. So, I think that's a bit out of time. I think like I said, Saints Row is a great series. One thing is that each game kind of like references previous games a lot, Saints Row 4 especially, but I like the series. I like that they make it fun to explore each city. I like that there's always stuff to do and activities. And I like the fact that, especially towards the end, it gets a good tone and it's about, having a bit of fun. So I'll leave you now with another example of how Saints Row 4 is awesome. It is called Matt's Text Adventure because, similar to Saints Row the Third, yes, in Saints Row the 4, there is a text adventure. It's kind of a basic one, but suddenly most of the gameplay turns to largely text and some images, and you just select an option. It is fun. It's fun that the game has a bunch of callbacks to classic games. It references a lot of stuff like that. But this is the music that plays. And as you can listen, it's kind of like classic, and it does the whole, like classic retro sort of music to it. So I'll leave you now with Matt's Text Adventure. This has been David Collins with BitNote. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you enjoy. And of course, composed also by Malcolm Kirby Jr.